Number 10. Football Party. In September 2017, a Texas bartender served one too many drinks to a man who later went on a murder spree at his estranged wife's apartment. 27-year-old Lindsay Glass was bartending at a piano pub when one of her friends, Spencer Height, showed up for his usual evening hijinks. However, on this particular night, he didn't seem like himself and kept downing drink after drink. As a matter of fact, he visited the pub twice and had 2 gins, 2 beers, and a shot. For context, Height's marriage was falling apart at this point in his life, and he'd already moved out of his wife's apartment. Now, obviously, Glass noticed his strange behavior as he kept on mumbling about how he had to do some dirty work and put someone in their place. Oh, and during this whole binge drinking thing, he had a big knife that he was fidgeting around with, too. But because the bartender was friends with him, she just kind of ignored his behavior and kept serving him drinks. She did text her coworker about how Height was acting weird, though. After he left, she decided to follow him to his estranged wife's place, and there, she realized that something horrible had happened. The man she'd served all those drinks to was about to go on a shooting rampage at a football watch party. Of course, she called 911, but by the time any help arrived, it was already too late. Height had gunned down his wife and 7 of her friends. The police did arrive and shoot him down, saving at least one person at the party. With that said, court documents indicated that his blood alcohol levels were 4 times higher than the legal limit, which obviously meant that Glass was going to face a year in jail and a big fine for serving an already intoxicated and clearly insane person. Number 9. Fake security. In August 2021, an Atlanta bartender was abducted by someone wearing a security uniform while she was coming home from her shift. Hours later, she was found dead, face down in a nearby area. Mariam Abdurrab, who worked the night shift at the Reverie VR bar in Midtown Atlanta, was on her way back home where she lived with her boyfriend. However, in the early hours of the morning, her boyfriend Jerry Antoine called 911 to report that he'd just seen her being forced into a car by a man in a security uniform. Now, this happened around 5 a.m., which meant that there wasn't a lot going on around the neighborhood, so all hands were on deck to triangulate the suspect's location and rescue her. But just an hour after the investigation began, another 911 call came in reporting gunshots in the Lakewood Avenue area. When the police arrived, they discovered Miriam's dead body. It didn't take long to catch the suspect, DeMarcus Brinkley, as he was arrested after he crashed during a high-speed police chase. Interestingly enough, he'd already spent 7 years in prison for child molestation before. DeMarcus was eventually charged with murder, possession of a firearm, aggravated assault, kidnapping, and a bunch of other stuff, meaning that he's probably going to spend the rest of his life in prison. Number 8. Drug binge. In April 2017, an Indiana man was charged with the murder of a 24-year-old bartender after the two went on a drug binge. Nicole Gland, who worked at the Upper Deck Lounge, used to get drugs from the 50-year-old bouncer of the establishment, Christopher Dillard. One night, the co-workers decided to party hard with some cocaine and marijuana. Dillard wasn't working at the time and linked up with Gland after she finished her bartending shift. At around 7 a.m., however, his girlfriend received a call from him saying that he'd screwed up and that he didn't know if she'd take him back. And, while he didn't explicitly say anything about the murder at that point, it was clear something terrible had happened. Dillard had brutally stabbed Gland to death. Her body was found slumped over the wheel of her Ford Escape outside the Upper Deck Lounge at 9 a.m. Once Dillard's girlfriend found out about the bartender's murder, though, she connected the dots and called Hobart police to report that a knife was missing from their butcher block. She had actually called the police 2 days before that to report that Dillard had taken her car without permission. But, according to the man himself, he claimed he took the knife for protection a couple of months ago, but that it had fallen out of the car at some point. Dillard told police that he didn't mean to kill the girl and that the events from that night were hazy from all the drugs and partying. But of course, that's not really a defense, which is why he's been charged with murder and sentenced to 65 years in prison. The motivation behind the stabbing, however, remains shrouded in mystery to this day. Number 7. Money trouble. In January 2018, a Silver Spring bartender was arrested by police after an argument with restaurant owners regarding compensation that turned into a brutal bloodbath. Carleif Moye, who was working at the Blue Sunday Bar and Grill in Bowie, wanted to discuss his payment with the owners, Jin Chen, Sherwood Morgan, and Zhu Xin Zhao. However, it didn't take long for it to turn into a heated argument, and after pacing in and out of the restaurant's office a couple of times, Moye returned with a gun. Sadly, it looked like they couldn't come to an agreement as Moye opened fire on his bosses, killing all three of them in the process. He then took the money that was on the desk and fled the scene. Oh, and he also poured water over what he thought was the surveillance system and shot it multiple times for good measure. Unfortunately for him, the footage was still intact, which meant that the cops were able to identify and arrest him. Strangely enough, he blamed his erratic behavior on a brain injury that he suffered in 2014 when he was attacked with a cinder block. According to him, that injury completely altered his personality. After some examination from experts, the judge ruled that it was cold and calculated murder, resulting in a handout of 3 consecutive life sentences. Number 6. High score. In May 2015, a French bartender was convicted of manslaughter for serving 56 shots to a man for a drinking contest, which resulted in him dying. 47-year-old Gilles Crepin, who worked at a bar called Starter in the central French town of Clermont-Ferrand, had a way of selling shots to his patrons. At his bar, he kept a scoreboard that displayed the record for downing shots in one go. Multiple people would try to claim the top spot with varying degrees of success. One day, 56-year-old Renaud Prudhomme stepped up, determined to match the challenge and get a high score. And while he did surprisingly manage to go through 56 shots, his celebrations didn't last very long. He was helped home by his daughter and friends, whom he spent the evening with, but heading into the night, his condition started to worsen and emergency services had to be called. Sadly, he died in a hospital the following day. As expected with cases of over-serving alcohol, the police instantly took Crepin into custody for giving a lethal dose of alcohol to his customer. That said, he pleaded that it was a decision guided by emotion and that the actual person pushing Renaud to break the record was his daughter. So, after spending 4 months in jail, the bartender was allowed to walk out on the condition that he'd be banned from working at a bar for at least 1 year. Number 5. Vaccine card. In December 2021, a Seattle bartender was left wounded when a simple request to see a vaccine card turned into a violent encounter. Felicity Ogilvie, who worked at Joe's Bar and Grill, was only following King County's COVID guidelines when she asked a man to show his vaccination card. And when he couldn't produce it, she simply asked him to leave, which, again, is standard procedure. However, rather than turning around and walking out, the man started hurling aggressive insults at her. When her coworker tried to intervene, he pushed them away too. After multiple attempts to make him leave, Felicity decided to take matters into her own hands and threw him out herself. But instead of admitting defeat, the man came back at her and hit her with something sharp, and it was enough to cut her cheek open. At that point, the suspect fled the scene. The bartender, on the other hand, was left bleeding all over her sweatshirt and had to get 30 stitches both outside and inside her cheek. Thankfully, the damage was only cosmetic, but according to her, it could have easily been a fatal hit to her eye or her neck. The Seattle police still haven't caught the suspect, so no prison sentences have been handed out here. Can you think of any other violent altercations that happened over someone asking for a Vax card? Tell us in the comments and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 4. Wrong place, wrong time. In April 2016, a North Charleston bartender was shot and killed after a failed robbery attempt. Eric Brantley, who worked at the Park Circle bar called the Sparrow, was about to leave after finishing his late-night shift. But while he was getting on his motorcycle, 2 robbers pulled up next to him and held him at gunpoint. Now, rather than complying and giving away his possessions, Brantley decided to resist, which resulted in them opening fire and shooting him 5 times, including once in the head. And while they obviously fled after murdering the bartender, surveillance footage from surrounding businesses led the police to the prime suspects, DeAndre Murphy and Jamal Green. Apparently, the pair was out with several others to get some marijuana, but when they saw Brantley all by himself in the Park Circle, they decided to hop out and make some extra cash. Of course, it all went horribly wrong. Brantley just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And because the bartender was a pretty popular member of the area's food and beverage industry, a ton of people showed up to see the court case go through. Murphy and Green were sentenced to 30 years in prison on murder and armed robbery charges. Number 3. Arsonistmaniac. In December 2014, a Charleston man was arrested after he threatened to kill a bartender and burn down his apartment after an argument. 43-year-old Robert Shannon Lord had been a pretty frequent offender at the Ashley River Road pub, as he had a knack for getting mad over minor inconveniences. According to the bartender, this is exactly what happened when he walked into the establishment all riled up, screaming and hurling abuse at everyone. Apparently, he was there to seek revenge after the cops were called on him the previous night for causing a disturbance. Lord definitely wasn't going to let anyone do that to him again this time around. He straight up threatened to murder the bartender for calling the cops and said that he'd burn the whole place down. However, when Lord felt his words weren't instilling fear into everyone, he grabbed a bottle, smashed its end, and began to thrust it at people around him. On top of that, he also grabbed a man's shirt and forced him against a wall. Thankfully, though, someone was able to slip under his radar and call the cops, who arrived on the scene to escort him out and take him into custody. Number 2. Drug Lord. In August 2021, the GBI received reports from a source that a local bartender was distributing drugs in the small community of Tifton in South Georgia. 21-year-old Edgar Fernando Neri, who is also known as Colocho, dipped his toes into the drug trafficking business by supplying meth to people at the bar he worked at. However, as his side business grew, so did his ambitions. Not only did he want to increase his scope, but Colocho also wanted to be the big drug trafficker in the region. As a matter of fact, he wanted the source that outed him to buy a massive amount of drugs from LA. Colocho's actual endgame was to collaborate with his supplier in Cali and move kilos of meth, cocaine, and actual weaponry. In fact, he'd already made deals to purchase body armor, rifles, a rocket launcher, and rockets. So he was kind of switching businesses from a drug trafficker to a full-blown terrorist. It was this move that prompted a quick response from the federal authorities, as they closed in and eventually arrested him. He was convicted on drug trafficking charges and faces 20 years in prison with a pretty hefty fine of $1 million. Number 1. Unlucky birthday. In June 2017, a Canton bartender was robbed and shot to death while he was walking back from his birthday party. Sebastian Dvorak was a popular bartender at Riley's Oyster locations and was just on his way back from celebrating his 27th birthday when he was stopped at gunpoint and asked to give away his possessions. And while he did comply, for the most part, the robbery still turned bad for him as the 21-year-old suspect, Malik Mungo, shot him in the chest and fled the scene. It looked like a pretty simple case of robbery, but some deeper investigation from the police and federal agents uncovered a violent gang called 500 that Mungo was a part of. Led by the infamous Bloods, the gang sold drugs and regularly sent out members to rob people. After he was arrested, Mungo admitted to smoking pot and wandering Canton looking for unlocked cars to steal on the day of the murder. He insisted that he didn't actually pull the trigger and claimed that a casual acquaintance did it. And to really nail things down, detectives found Dvorak's cell phone and Nintendo Switch in Mungo's possession. In the end, not only did Mungo get convicted, but 12 other gang members were also caught and tried for various charges. Thanks for watching. Do you think that bartenders have a knack for attracting trouble because they just deal with so many drunk people? Tell us in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time on The Bad Badger.